You have mentioned that circular economy is silent, invisible in terms of low or no marketing. And it's opposite to loud linear economy and high consumption. The question is why any company should want to be silent and reserved yet sustainable. How to maintain the competitiveness of circular products when they are compared to highly marketed products, which sometimes even use greenwashing strategies. Very complex question, but
no. It's the why do we need marketing? Because in the globalization, the user or potential buyer doesn't know the producer anymore. So if somewhere in Japan or South America, somebody produces an ingenious new thing, he has to make huge publicity. Otherwise, nobody knows about it. Whereas a few hundred years ago, all the things were produced locally. And so you knew if you needed new shoes, you know where the shoemaker was in your village. And this situation is still for the circular economy. If you need a plumber, you know there is a plumber in your village. And so you will ask him. You will not go on internet and see if there is a plumber, a cheap plumber in China or something, because it's simply useless. The same with cars. If you have a break, if your car breaks down, let's say you have a Japanese car, you will not phone the factory in Japan to come and repair your car. You will ask for a local workshop. So the local workshop doesn't need publicity because you know he's there. But the globalized manufacturer needs publicity, otherwise you don't even know that they have this new fantastic thing. In the meantime, the publicity costs are up to 80% of the sales price. So therefore, the globalized manufacturing is extremely efficient and cheap. But the major cost now is logistics and marketing. I don't know if you have watched the news yesterday and you have seen this 400-meter long container ship that is blocking the Suez Canal. And that means that hundreds of ships on both sides in the Suez Canal are also blocked, which means that the supply chain suddenly has stopped. So what do you do if you are just in time, a very efficient production, but you get your components from somewhere else? Well, you close down your factory and wait until this big container ship has been cleared away. Hopefully it will not break into two parts. So the resilience of the circular economy is that you always have plenty of things around you, spare parts. You don't need a specific thing as you need in manufacturing. You can use other things. And the cost of non-availability of spare parts. Well, we saw it with Corona, with COVID-19. We couldn't get face masks because they are produced in Wuhan. And Wuhan was closed down because that's where the coronavirus started. And then we needed incubators. But of course, we couldn't get the incubators because they are produced in Wuhan. Wuhan is the center of the world globalized medical equipment manufacturer. And if you close down Wuhan, you basically close down manufacturing of medical equipment. Even there now, all the governments I know have said we have to have a local vaccine production. We have to have a local face mask production, because we cannot depend, the survival cannot depend on somebody in China. So in my opinion, what I call the intelligent decentralization has already in many areas replaced globalization. And it will continue.
Thank you very much. How to foster the activities of reusing and remanufacturing? It seems that Lithuania or maybe other countries are concentrated on waste management and treatment. This is a need of business imagination and a lot of motivation. How to motivate business? And we have quite conventional industries in Lithuania. We are, I suppose, Soviet industrial, countries.
Well, you have to motivate the users, the owner users, and you have to motivate the economic actors. And I showed you in one slide, the circular economy is about natural capital, which is parks and forests, about cultural capital, cathedrals and castles, human capital, which is people, education. I saw the new university in Vilnius. All these hospitals, of course, is part of human capital, maintaining the quality of human capital. All these activities are labor intensive and they are local. So the first thing to do for a government is make labor cheap. And the easiest way to make labor cheaper is don't tax labor. Stop taxing on income of labor. Tax anything, tax things you don't want. So tax waste, resource consumption, emissions, anything you don't want. But don't tax things that you want to promote, such as jobs. And if you do that, then immediately it becomes much cheaper than to repair and remanufacture, because the labor in manufacturing is very small. So the circular economy activities are becoming much cheaper compared to new products. And that is the first time I mentioned that. I wrote a paper 5 years ago on this that was published in England by the Royal Society. And then there was big outcry. I'm always accused of being nuts, of being mad, because you cannot, in the European Union, 56% of total income of nation states is taxes on labor. Now, if you stop taxing labor, well, then the state is bankrupt. And of course, I don't accept that argument, because you can tax the Tobin tax on emails, and you can tax the GAFAs, the Google and Alphabet and Amazon and all these people, Facebook. We haven't dared it. Well, let's be brave and start changing, but let's stop taxing people. And even in the European Commission now, this is the Commissioner of Finance at the last EU meeting. He said to the member states, stop taxing labor, find other ways to tax. So with my first book, it took 40 years until it was accepted. I think this time it will take much less. And it's seriously discussed now at universities and in governments, how can we finance the state without labor taxes? Because then it would make all these caring activities, caring for people, caring for nature, caring for stocks of objects, would make much more competitive. But it's a revolution. It's something we have never done. So you have to rethink the whole economy.
Simple question. What do you think about incineration? Because sometimes they call themselves circular as a part of circular economy.
Well, incineration is if you have a combined heat and power production. In other words, you produce electricity and heat houses nearby or greenhouses. And if you have if the flue gases are cleaned and which is a very expensive technology, then incineration is probably quite an intelligent solution. Simply because plastic, a lot of the household waste is plastics and packaging waste. Plastic is oil. So instead of burning oil, you get the same thing by burning plastics. There is if you look at the ecology of plastic recycling, if you can depolymerize plastics, for example, nylon, you get really the pure monomer that you can repolymerize. That is certainly a much better solution than burning nylon. But all the cheap or very thin plastics that are very difficult to recycle, because you cannot very often not depolymerize it. Then until we have found a better material, then incineration is not the worst solution, but you have to make sure that you use the heat that you produce and that you clean the flue gases, especially for also toxic things. You have to be careful what you are burning, because, for example, medications or chemical waste, you have to burn to incinerate at very high temperatures. So you have to make sure you collect things separately. And anything that is toxic, you have to incinerate at 3,000 or 4,000 degrees, which is expensive.
And then the waste hierarchy, capacities of incineration also an important question. The other question, you'd mentioned circular economy and extended producer responsibility schemes leads to decentralization. This is already happening. What recycled in Spain, sold in Spain. What is in France, let's stay reused or recycled in France. What about single EU market? How small countries will compete with those decentralized local scheme of big countries, where main goal is to eliminate import and promote local industry under the flag of circularity?
Well, this is the problem with a lot of manufacturing. Take glass manufacturing, bottles. It's a huge investment, and that means it's a long time to amortize, to depreciate your investment. Same with cement making. So if there is a better way of, there was one, paper making is the same thing. It's normally 30 years to amortize. The paper industry has found a much better, cheaper way to produce paper using life sciences than the way we do it today. The problem is they are willing to apply this technology once they have to replace existing paper mills. But if they would stop the present paper mills and build a new one, they would lose a lot of money. So therefore, same with cement making, with all these material production, steel making, if you have a new, better technology, you tend always to first use the existing technology to the end. And then when you have to replace the factory, then you build a new technology. Now, if this new technology is also cheaper, then of course you run the risk that other countries that so far have not produced this material, that they will build the new technology and then they will beat you in the market. So you have to be very careful in a global market. Or if you want, as a government, you want to stop the globalization, then the easiest way is do not subsidize the production and consumption of fossil fuels. The annual subsidies worldwide of production and consumption of fossil fuels is $5 trillion. That's a 5 with 12 zeros. So it's a huge figure. And nation states could save on a global level $5 trillion simply by stopping subsidies of fossil fuels. But that, of course, means that then your globalized industry would break down, because then transport of a container on a container ship from Japan or China to Europe would suddenly cost 5 times of what it costs today. And it would no longer be economic feasible. So again, the courage to change things radically is, you need a lot of courage, and governments first want to really think through the whole economic system to make sure that their economy will survive. But they are running out of time, because innovation in some of the things I showed you is so fast that in the end, they will have to close down their factories because they are no longer competitive on the local market. And I know it's asking a lot of an economist or a professor in economics who has been teaching something for the last 30 years to now tell his students, look, I'm sorry about that, but I found a better way. So forget all the things I've told you the last 30 years. Now I'll tell you what is true. So it will take at least one generation of politicians and economists until things radically change. Or remember COVID-19, it will need something where you no longer have a choice. From one day to the next, basically, you suddenly have to say, okay, no more airplanes, no more container ships, no more. And then all the countries that have a decentralized industry or a circular economy based on existing stocks will have a huge competitive advantage. But of course, we all hope that COVID-19 was a one-time experience, because these things are very painful. These abrupt, disruptive changes are very painful.
Can we have another question, Walter?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Is there a chance that big corporations nowadays present their work as sustainable, whereas they use the system only to increase the production and sales, and there are nothing sustainable after all. How can be supervised and ensured to prevent this type of sustainability?
If you want to change something in a industry, you have to convince the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer. Because if you can convince him, then the company will change. And when I talk to industry about remanufacturing, I never talk about jobs or the environment, because they are not interested in that. I tell them that the return on investment on a remanufacturing plant is 5 times the return on investment of a plant manufacturing the same product. And I can show the figures from Caterpillar or Renault. And then the chief finance officer or the CEO will say, 5 times more money. That means for me 5 times more bonus. Okay, we'll do it. But don't try to tell him that he has to do it to save the planet or something. Tell him it's your bonus. You can have much more money. So you have to adapt the things, the arguments to the people you talk to. But if you take a big company like Unilever, the CEO decided that they will, all the plastic packaging, they will only use one plastic monomer that can be depolymerized. And they added a tracker, an element, so that in a automatic plastic recycling machine, their plastic can be recognized by the machine and sorted out so that Unilever gets its own plastic packaging back. And then they can really save money, because then they can reuse their plastic. But very often the greenwashing is, well, think of clean diesel. You know, clean diesel was a very good marketing trick, and it worked for a time. But in the case of the United States, it cost the German car industry $50 billion or something, because you don't cheat in the United States. In Europe, you can cheat. You can sell somebody a car, clean diesel, and then 5 years later, it turns out you have been cheating, and Dr. Merkel will put her hand over the German car industry and say, okay, you get 2,000 euros. But you cannot buy a clean car for 2,000 euros. So the liability, the producer liability in that case, showed that it works, but you have to apply it the American way. Not a responsibility. A responsibility is something that goes into your annual report, so you can say, look, we are green. Liability is something that goes in your balance sheet. And if you have huge liabilities that you don't have a figure and you don't have a date, people will say, investors will simply no longer buy your shares, because you must be crazy. But I gave on circular energy, I gave you a number of companies. For example, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, that is selling oil. They now are building, with a lot of help from the Dutch government, huge offshore windmills in the North Sea off the Dutch coast, because they want electricity to produce hydrogen. So I would say that in 10 years' time, Royal Dutch will sell more hydrogen than oil, because they have the distribution network, they have the publicity, they have all the logistics to distribute oil. Instead of distributing oil, they will distribute hydrogen. But you first have to have the green energy, the windmills, and then you have to have water, but that is an easy one, to produce hydrogen. Same thing is happening in Norway. Same thing is happening in Switzerland. We have hydro and nuclear. And we now have trucks. Hyundai has produced hydrogen fuel cell trucks for years. Toyota and Honda have produced cars for the last 20 years. Seoul in Japan, because we don't have the infrastructure. In Switzerland now we have, I think, 20 fuel stations where you can tank hydrogen. We have, I think, already 1,000 big trucks that use Hyundai trucks that use hydrogen fuel cells. The German railways have started converting their diesel trains to hydrogen. The same with the French railways. Norway, the famous express ferries in Norway, from last year onwards, all the new ferries, the Hurtigruten ferries, use hydrogen fuel cells instead of diesel. And all the cruise ships that you don't use electric engines will, from 2025 onwards, no longer be allowed in the fjords in Norway. So you can see that one country can do, or one company can do a lot, but they have to be convinced that this is the right strategy, and then they have to do it 100%, because it's not economically feasible to run two strategies for a long time. You can do it in a transfer phase, but you have to go full speed in the new way. And Shell, for example, they will not normally talk about it. I don't know, you have to, maybe they do if you look on their website, but they, strategy is silent, tactic is loud. So you talk a lot of things, but you basically don't talk about the strategic things you are doing, because you don't want to wake up your competitors.
And we ask you in our process for the clarity and core raw news about circularity. And the last question is about yes or no question. Is it true that without circular economy, people are only earth parasites which only can take value from the earth but not give back value for earth community?
It depends. If you go back and live in a way before the Anthropocene started, in other words, where you only use natural materials, wool, not cotton, because cotton is a huge, a pair of jeans needs 10 tons of water to produce. So you only use wool and wood and stones, then you can live in symbiosis with nature. Because whatever you throw away, somebody else will eat it, enzymes or bacteria. But if you are in the Anthropocene, in the synthetic man-made materials, then you have to remain in this man-made world and accept a man-made liability, where you have to close your own loops. then we still have a problem with nanomaterials. For example, the nanoplastics in the ocean. I don't know if you know the 3 sources of nanoplastics. The first one is wear and tear from tires and brakes from automobiles. Second one is textiles. And the third one is cosmetics. Now, cosmetics is easy to solve. Textiles, if you go back to, yes, wool and linen and things like this, it's easy to solve. The wear and tear from tires, we cannot really go back to steel wheels for cars or trucks. So with the tire wear, the nanoplastic from tires, that is the big thing that nobody has a clue how to solve it, except by not driving. So there will always be some things that will escape into synthetic materials, that will escape into nature. But at least we should stop the things like plastic in the oceans, the big things. But that is difficult to motivate governments and people, especially in less developed poor countries, that they should invest in this kind of technology, where instead of simply throwing things into the rivers.
Thank you very much for being with us. A lot of people writing, thanks for inspiration and other issues. And I think it will take time for us to understand what we have heard, and we will have a lot of reflections on that. So people, I really hope to look for your books that you mentioned, for ebook, as well as I think they will go now to buy those ones to have a hard copy. And I hope really that we will keep in touch.
The performance economy, I have about 40 copies left. So ask people to write to me if they want the e-copy, or you have my email on the or a hard copy. Okay.
And Walter, if we invite you to come to Lithuania after COVID, are you planning to accept our invitation?
It all depends on. I have a very limited mobility because I'm a patient of multiple sclerosis, and nobody knows how this thing develops. If I'm still enough mobile to use a wheelchair, then yes, why not? I love traveling. It's more than a year that I haven't been in an airplane. So
thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience. All the best.
Yeah. Labai atsiprašau renginio dalyvių už tai, kad pasinaudojame progą, kad Valteris dar turėjo pusvalandį pasakyti ilgiau. Ar būtų refleksijų grupėje? Gal kol kas dar Ugnė nerodyk.